Everybody. Gosh, it's been windy here, allergy season. So my voice has been cracking a little bit, coughing a little bit, sniffling a little bit. Hope everybody's doing well out there. Excuse me. Sorry, excuse me. Okay, that's better. Let me make sure that I am on here. So give it just a second to breathe, give people some time to jump on. I'm on there. I don't know if I'm streaming there. Hope everybody's doing well out there. Okay, looks like I'm streaming both places. Hope everybody's doing well. And just 1 second. Okay, so I want to talk. I've been thinking about this journey that we've all been on. Most of us, anyway, that follow this channel or watch have, at the very least, some healthy questions about Christianity, about religion, about the faith of our forefathers, perhaps. And it's just really interesting time to be alive, right? There's so much change happening so fast, and it can be overwhelming just trying to deal with the changes that are happening in our society. I was listening to a radio program yesterday, and they were talking about these changes that are being proposed by Google, where instead of doing a normal Google search, like what we've been used to for really, I guess, decades, they're talking about changing it into a completely AI format. And I don't know exactly what that's going to look like, but they were saying, Google was saying essentially that Google, the site, will do the Googling for you. So you'll ask an AI rather than typing in a search, and then the AI will put together results for you. I don't know how that's going to be different, but it sounds like it could be very different, because in the radio program, they were talking about how people who make their living using websites may have to, what they call it, pivot to the new technology. And so AI is coming upon us very, very quickly. I get frustrated at times that it seems like everything requires an app. Like you have to have 100 apps on your phone just to shop or do stuff. So there's just, especially for us that are a little bit older, there's just so much change happening so rapidly that in and of itself can be a lot to deal with. It's hard to find anchors. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, finding anchors for ourselves, finding some place of stability in a time when it seems like everything that can be shaken is being shaken, when it seems like our institutions are rapidly changing, our economy is rapidly changing, the marketplace is rapidly changing. And because there is so much information, because there are, shows like this one, and we have access to so much information, trying to sort through what's accurate information, what's disinformation. But it also opens up the possibilities for us, those of us that have questions. In the past, if you had questions about your faith, questions about the Bible, and I'm talking about, before the internet and stuff like that, sure, you might be able to go find some books that might be written on topics that might interest you or answer your questions. But typically, you would be in a community of people. You'd be in a church, right? And you'd be asking those questions within the community. And so the answers you're going to get are going to be generally a reinforcement of whatever the community believes, whatever the community of faith believes. That's how things have operated because that was your only place to go. And so that definitely kept us sort of cocooned in our groups or cocooned into our groupthink, if you understand what I mean by that, because there were not voices that we were able to hear that were speaking outside of our paradigms, that were speaking outside of our groupthink. And nobody deconstructs from anything. Nobody changes their values, their opinions, their ideas, their beliefs on anything unless they hear a voice, unless there is a voice that is speaking to them, that is speaking from outside of the structure, outside of the groupthink, outside of the paradigm. So with the arrival of the internet, with the arrival of things like YouTube and social media and Amazon podcasts, we have a wealth of information at our fingertips. So now if we have questions, if there are questions about the Bible, if there are questions about spirituality, if there are questions about anything, could be anything, we're no longer dependent upon the expertise within our community that we can access in a one-on-one 3D relationship, right? Because we have this virtual world now. We have virtual communities. The New Day Global community is a virtual community of people who have similar questions, similar experiences, and a lot of us that have escaped from Christianity, right? But that can leave us to some degree rudderless. It can leave us without anchors. It can leave us without a sense of things being stable or stability in our lives. And so that becomes very difficult in and of itself without all the other circumstances of life and things that can happen to us. That leaves us, it just can be a very difficult, very complex process. Now, I use the term deconstruction when I talk about my own journey. I'm very comfortable with the term deconstruction. And the reason that I'm comfortable with the term deconstruction and the reason that I like it is because when you go through something like this, if you were very devout, if you were sincere, if you were involved in serving in church or ministry or anything like that, then coming to this place where you're able to recognize the toxicity. Last week, I talked about separating the precious metal from the dross, right? Where it's not like, I don't know, giving up a belief in Santa Claus, right? It's not like just giving up belief in a figure that's out there that maybe isn't out there, that's maybe the product of imagination or the product of make-believe. And so, oh, well, I don't believe in God anymore, or I don't believe in God in the same way that I used to believe in God anymore. Because for a lot of us, our faith defined us. Our faith told us who we were. Our faith told us what the purpose was for our life. It told us about the nature of reality. It told us what to expect after death. It gave us resources. Now, we can argue whether or not these resources were beneficial or not, but at least it gave us some sense of resource, like a higher power that we could call on for help during difficult times, that we could look to the Bible, the community, the voice of the Holy Spirit for guidance about our future. I mean, if you think about it, it's really screwed up, right? Like, we can't see the future. We have to make decisions about the future. The only thing we can see is the past. And so from that perspective, a certain amount of regret is inevitable because we're going to make decisions with the best information that we have available to us at the time, hoping that it's going to work out for our future. And then if it doesn't work out the way we wanted it to, or worse, it brings a lot of pain and discomfort into our lives because of the choices that we made. We didn't have the benefit of foresight with that. So it's easy to sit there and say, well, I should have done this, or I wish I would have done that. And That's important. That can be part of like the learning process of life, right? That can be the value and the benefit of experience. But our mind can play tricks on us and say, if I would have made this other decision instead of this decision, if I would have chosen this path or this direction instead of this one, if I'd have made this choice instead of the one that I made, then our mind can create for us a fiction that says life would have been better if we would have made those choices. We wouldn't have suffered this pain, and we can fantasize about all the good things that we think would have happened or been brought into our lives if we'd have made a different decision. But the truth is, that's complete fantasy. That's complete fiction. We have no way of knowing if we had made better or different choices, what the outcomes would have been for us if we'd have gone on that journey or on that path. And so one of the benefits, particularly for those of us that were in charismatic Christianity or believed that God spoke through by the Spirit, either to our spirits or to us, or speaks through signs that we might see in our lives, or that speaks through other people, gives the Spirit. And so there's a level of certainty. There's a there's a resource for life. So you're drawing your sense of purpose, you're drawing your sense of identity, resources for crises, resources for making decisions about the future to try to make sure you're making the right decisions and being in the will of God. And so when you leave a lot of that stuff, or when you question a lot of that stuff, or when you wrestle through those questions and those things that led us or have led us to this path, this place in our journey where maybe we're not where we want to be, we're certainly not where we will be, but we're not where we were. And so it can be a very difficult, trying time. And so it isn't like just giving up belief in Santa Claus. It's like deconstructing or tearing down or ripping out brick by brick, stone by stone, the various aspects of our lives. I can't help. And so I'm going to use a lot of biblical metaphors and patterns that I think can speak to us and help us and relate to, that we can relate to while we're on this journey and while we're where we are at in this journey. And so one of the biblical metaphors is when Jesus is giving what's known as the Olivet Discourse in the Synoptic Gospels. Matthew 24, probably the most familiar and the one that people have read the most, but also I think Luke 21 and Mark 13 talk about the same thing. But in all three accounts, Jesus says, he shows them the temple, and the temple was central to Jewish life. It was central to worship. It was their security. You can read in the book of Jeremiah, when the Babylonians are getting ready to attack Israel, the prophets in the community, their security against the Babylonian invasion is that the temple is in place. And so that can represent for us whatever our temple was, right? Our sense of self, our sense of identity, our sense of faith, whatever it is that protects us, the things that we use that protect us from threats, all that kind of stuff. And Jesus says that this temple, not one stone will be left. In other words, it's not only going to be destroyed, it's not only going to be damaged, but the temple is going to be so completely destroyed, it's going to be so completely deconstructed that every stone is going to be ripped out and apart. So it's going to be completely obliterated. And so I want you to think about that. What was central to their religion? What was central to their life? What gave them identity? What gave them purpose? What gave them security? Jesus says it's going to be completely deconstructed. It's going to be completely pulled apart, brick by brick, stone by stone, and then burnt with fire. And then you're going to be sent out basically into exile, sent out into exile by the Roman Empire. And there's going to be a diaspora, the Bible calls it, where there's going to be a dispersing of that. Everybody's going to be going on their own way. Everybody's going to be on their own journey, right? So that was the end of an age. That was the end of an epoch. That was the end of an era. The old was being completely done away with, and something completely brand new was being ushered in. And the problem is that we don't know what that new is going to look like. We don't even have something in our past that we can relate to that's going to relate to the new, that can give us some sense that we even have a path forward, that we have a roadmap forward, that we have a map to guide us through our journey. And so I've been thinking, and so that's why I call it deconstruction, because that's kind of the process, certainly that I've been in, and certainly that a lot of us have been in as well. And the Bible speaks to these epochs, it speaks to these moments in time when there is a dramatic shift in consciousness. There's a dramatic shift in worship. There's a dramatic shift in the understanding of reality. There's a dramatic shift in the understanding of who we are. We're not who we thought we were, but we're not who we will be yet. And so again, we're in this place of just messy transition along the path, along the journey. So just thinking about, I'm thinking about Moses. Talked to a friend of mine this week, had a very fruitful conversation with him. And he mentioned to me, Moses is on the backside of the desert tending sheep, and he's 80 years old. He's 80 years old. And he really doesn't know who he is. At 80 years old, he's having to ask the question, who am I? You can think about it this way, or this is how I think about it. Here's Moses at 80 years old. He was raised for the first 40 years of his life, he was raised in the house of Pharaoh. Stephen says in Acts chapter 7 that Moses was taught in all the ways and manners of Egypt. And Egypt was a very religious society. Much of what we have imported into the West that are foundational to Western thinking, the idea of a soul, the idea of an afterlife, the idea of resurrection, to some extent, even the idea or the concept of a dying and rising God, all of this stuff was embedded in Egyptian culture. And so especially for the pharaohs, who were considered to be the image of God on the earth, the representation of God on the earth, they were taught in all of the occult ways, all of the spiritual ways of Egypt. So think about it. Very religious society. Now, the Hebrews didn't really have a religion per se. They were serving the Pharaoh. They were slaves to Pharaoh and to Egyptians. And in Exodus, it says that they were building the treasure cities. So they were enriching the Egyptian system that they were in bondage to, right? And Moses is born outside of that reality. But again, the Hebrews didn't have the Torah. They didn't have the tabernacle. They didn't have the temple. They didn't even know who their God was. So you can think about Egyptian as any type of worldly system. And I think for my purposes this morning, I want to talk about Egypt as the religious system, right? The religious system that tells us who we are, tells us what our purpose is, tells us what our life is supposed to be like, and then to a certain degree enslaves us for the purpose of building treasure cities or for the purpose of enriching those that are at the upper echelons of that system who are reaping all the benefits of our labors, right? So Moses is born outside of that. Moses is born in the system, like immersed. So it's not like Moses was taken out of. Okay, so the name Moses, he was named Moses because Pharaoh was murdering the Hebrew babies, male children, and so his mom puts him in an ark and puts him in water and sends him, and Pharaoh's daughter finds him, and Moses means to be withdrawn from the waters. And from a mystical place, the term water in the Hebrew scriptures often refers to a stream of consciousness. So there's this stream of consciousness of slavery, right? There's this stream of consciousness of serving the system, and Moses is drawn out of that stream of consciousness, and then he is fully immersed in the religion and system that was enslaving the people. He understood it inside and out. He understood it better than anybody else that was a Hebrew at that time could have understood it. And then at some point in time, Moses murders an Egyptian and who's abusing one of the Hebrews. So at some point in time, even though Moses is immersed in the system, he recognizes the abuse of the system. He recognizes the abuse of the system, and he tries to kill the system that's inside of him, if that makes sense. Becomes angry at the system. He has a moment of trauma that is a moment of awakening. And sometimes awakenings are traumatic. It isn't always, well, I awakened in 2016, I awakened in 2012, I awakened in 2020, whatever the case may be, whatever we mean by that, we came into a new state of consciousness. We were withdrawn from the waters, right? But that is a very traumatic experience for many of us. So you can see Moses being withdrawn from that stream of consciousness again, this time through a trauma, right? A trauma that says this system is abusive. I don't like this. I'm going to kill this, and I'm going to flee from this. And so he flees into the wilderness, and he meets a man named Jethro, who is a priest. He is a priest of Midian. So now there's a new system. There's a new path. There's a new spirituality. You can apply this to anything. You can apply it to, I left the Christian system and went into the New Age thought or New Thought. I left the Christian system and I went into atheism or philosophy or materialism, whatever the case may be. Whatever priest you found that guided you to that place of reconstructing, because when our temple is torn down, again, I'm speaking metaphorically, when we lose our sense of purpose, we lose our sense of identity, we lose those anchors in those places of security, then we can't stay there. The mind, the brain, you can't survive in that place. And so you run into a priest, whatever the voices are that you're listening to, on the internet or whatever the case may be. So some people were shepherded by Jethro into philosophical atheism or scientific materialism. Some were shepherded into Christianity from a more Eastern and Orthodox perspective. Some were shepherded into alternative forms of spirituality. Some were shepherded into Eastern forms of spirituality. Maybe it was Buddhism or Zen or various different forms of Hinduism, where they're working with chakras now and doing chakra type meditations and things like that. Whatever the case may be, we all, on this journey, we all meet our Jethro or our Jethros. Maybe we try various different paths along the way. But eventually Moses finds himself just by himself in a desert, a place that doesn't sustain life. It's really important to understand that. It's not conducive to sustaining life. It's hot, it's dry, it's thirsty, and he's just shepherding a little flock of sheep. And he's 80 years old, right? And then one day, God speaks to him. He sees a burning bush. There's a fire in the bush, and the bush is burning, but it's not consumed. And the voice of God speaks to him, and he meets God in a different way. He meets God with a different name. It is the God of the traditions of his forefathers, of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. But he sees an aspect of God that was not there before. He gets a different name for God. He's like, who do I say sent me? So once again, he's Moses. He's being withdrawn from the waters, right? Now he's being pulled out of, if you will, of the stream of consciousness of Jethro and of Midian, and he's seeing the divine source, creator, consciousness, God, whatever, the nature of reality, the universe, however you want to understand it. He's seeing it in a totally different light that no one has ever seen before. And he's being redefined in terms of his identity and in terms of his purpose, because God says you're going to go back to Egypt and you're going to set the captives free. The voice of the burning bush tells him, the groaning of my people who are groaning under their chains, they are groaning under hard bondage. It has come up to me. And so now I'm sending you as the deliverer. So I want you to watch how Moses is removed from the consciousness of a Hebrew slave when he's an infant. So he never has exposure to that. He is withdrawn from the water or the consciousness of Egypt when he recognizes the abusive nature of it, sees it for what it is, and flees into the desert. And now he's being withdrawn from the consciousness of Midian in the desert and being given new marching orders, if you will, a new sense of identity, a new sense of purpose, a new why for what he's for doing what he's doing. And now he's being sent back because God says, I've heard the cries of my people. They're groaning under bitterness. They're groaning under bondage. In the first chapter of Exodus, it says that Pharaoh made the children of Israel made their lives bitter with hard bondage. So they were bitter, right? So he comes in, goes through all this stuff with the plagues and all that stuff, and he takes this company of people now away from everything that they've ever known, away from the life that they've known. So the one consciousness is withdrawn from the one person is withdrawn from the consciousness in the waters with a new consciousness, right? He's been through this process a few times. So now when he's coming back to the Pharaoh, he's speaking to the system with a voice and a consciousness that is very contrary to the system, that is very contentious to the system, that's really kind of at war with the system. And he's speaking to the Hebrews a message of liberation, that your life doesn't have to be like this, that this is abusive, that there is a better future out there for you, that there is a God that you can meet on the mountain and that you can worship that can completely redefine you. And there is a land flowing with milk and honey where instead of being slaves, you're going to be the head and not the tail. You're going to be above and not beneath. And so that voice has to come from outside the paradigm and speak into the paradigm, being at war sometimes with the old thing, being at war with the old paradigm, but then also offering a prophetic word of hope to the people that says you're not going to have to groan under this bondage and this stuff that you're dealing with anymore. And we're going to take you into a new revelation of the divine. We're going to take you into a new revelation of God. And we're going to take you into a land that flows with milk and honey. And so the very interesting thing happens. He takes them out into the desert. This isn't a land flowing with milk and honey. Again, this is a land of scorpions and snakes and cobras and heat. And they go 3 days, which is interesting in and of itself, especially when we consider the three, I want to say baptisms, but it's almost like the opposite of baptism. Baptism is to be immersed in water and made a disciple. Moses being withdrawn from those baptisms, being withdrawn from those waters. And so they're following Moses, and they finally find a place called Mara. They finally find a place that has water, but they can't drink the water because the water is bitter. I think it's interesting that they can't drink the water because the water is bitter, because the story begins in Exodus chapter 1 that the children of Israel, that the system, that Egypt, that Pharaoh made their life bitter with hard bondage. And so they get out there in the wilderness, again, no anchors, starting this journey. It's not what we thought it was going to be. It's not what we thought we were promised. Finally, there's some water to drink, but it's so bitter. And I think part of what's happening in the story here is that, and sometimes life does this to us, that we beat our head, we get beat up in life, or various different circumstances come our way that are difficult. And the purpose in the difficulty is for us to become introspective, for us to become self-reflective, for us to look at what's inside of us. So we can leave the system, we can leave the doctrines, we can even be, angry with it. We can share with other people. We can make posts on social media. We can do videos like this, whatever the case may be. And so we've left the external circumstances, but the inward formation that took place, what was formed inside of us, all those years of indoctrination, all those years of sitting under preaching, all those years of reading Christian books or being immersed in a Christian community, that stuff is still inside of us. And when we realized that it was unhealthy for us, when we realized that we had freedoms that we did not, that we could have accessed, but we were told we couldn't access them. So whatever constrictions were put on you that maybe prevented you, in my case, from even listening to secular music. In some people's case, even going to movies. In other people's case, it could be, any number of things where there's this sort of phony ethic or phony moral that prevents us from expressing a level of freedom or pursuing an interest, right? In my case, because I was, called to ministry very young, I pursued ministry. I didn't consider the other areas of my life or the other talents or abilities that I had that I could have accessed, because I was taught if you're called and you go out and do something other than the calling, you're going to end up like Jonah, being swallowed up by a whale or something like that. So you cede your choices, you surrender your choices. Maybe for some of you, you had a niece or a nephew or a son or a daughter or a grandson or granddaughter who was gay or sexually oriented differently, and they got married and you didn't attend. You didn't have the freedom to attend or to celebrate with your loved one because of that constriction, that bondage. And so there's bitterness there. There's pain there. Maybe some of you gave really a lot of time, and now it feels like you wasted all of that time. Or you gave a lot of money and it feels like you wasted all of that money. Whatever the case may be, there's bitterness in there. And so when Moses is on his journey, I'm going to show you the parallels here. When Moses is on his journey, he doesn't know who he is. 80 years old, life doesn't have meaning, purpose, doesn't know who he is, and then all of a sudden now there's this new awakening, this new found name of God, this new consciousness of God, and he's sent back into Egypt. And so we can find ourselves, who am I? Why am I here? Where am I going? What is life about? And having to wrestle with those things. And Moses did this for the next 40 years of his life before that happened. And then you got the children of Israel on the same journey to freedom, but they're in a desert. Their temple's been pulled up, if you will. They're in a desert, no water, heat, no life, no direction, not a land flowing with milk and honey. And all we have to drink here are these bitter waters. And in the story, God tells Moses, shows him a stick or a tree or a piece of wood, depending on the translation. And he sticks it in the water. And when he sticks it in the water is made sweet. And they're able to drink. They're able to drink from that water. And then God makes a very interesting promise to them. He says, if you'll follow me, if you'll diligently obey me, if you'll follow the path that I have sent out for you, he says, then I will not allow any of the sickness of the Egyptians to come upon you, for I am the Lord that heals you. Now, forget about the following obedient part for a second. Forget about physical sickness and physical healing. I won't send the sicknesses of the Egyptians on you. In other words, most of us left because it made us sick, right? We got sick and tired of it, whatever the case may be. We saw it as being something different than what it was. We became disillusioned. but we're still carrying that internal formation. And as long as we have that internal formation, in other words, as long as we still have the messaging, the programmed feelings of religion on the inside of us, we may have left the house of worship, but the house of worship hasn't left us. It's still inside of us. It's still making us feel ashamed. It's still governing the way that we're thinking. It's still governing and providing frames for us in the way that we're experiencing life. So there's still that bitterness there, or there's hurt and pain from the past. And so we're bitter about it. And so the promise is, or the challenge is, and the opportunity is to allow, again, for something new to enter into our waters. Because remember, water, like I said at the beginning, there's so much water in all of this, reflects consciousness. It reflects the programming. It reflects the way we think, the way we feel, mental and emotional health. And so along the way, there are opportunities for us to have encounters that will introduce something new, put a tree, put a stick, put something new, something that hasn't been in the water before, put it in the water. And as it's in the water, it will make that bitter water sweet. So this leads me up to my primary point, and what I think is the biggest challenge for us is that we're not who we were, we're not where we were, but we are not yet where we will be, and we are not yet who we will become. And the story of the Egyptian journey in the wilderness is basically a story of a people that couldn't get withdrawn from the water. In other words, their thinking and feeling repetitively every day was the same. And it was tainted, governed, affected. All of us can be at different places, but the water's still bitter, right? The water is still bitter. And so the invitation is to allow something new into our thinking, something new into our consciousness, not just taking away. Deconstruction is taking away. Deconstruction is pulling every stone up from the other. Deconstruction is Moses mad at the Egyptian for being abusive to one of his brethren and killing the Egyptian. And deconstruction leaves us bitter. Deconstruction leaves us rudderless, anchorless. That's a removing, that's a pulling away. This is an adding something new, introducing a new tree, introducing a new stick, introducing a new thing from, watch it, it's Moses that does this, because Moses has been withdrawn from the waters of consciousness, right? And just because they drank sweet water doesn't mean that was the destination. So, Aaron, what are you saying? How do I make this practical? So I think it's important for us to listen to new voices and try new things. And again, this could be the Eastern doctrines. I'm talking about the Eastern Orthodox churches. They view Jesus different. They view life different. They view humanity different. They view redemption differently than we do in the West, in the Latin stream. For some people, it's that. For me, it was that for a while. That was my stick that made my bitter water sweet. And I thought, oh man, this water's so good. This is it, right? This is the real Christianity. This is the true Christianity. And then after a while, it was like, no, that's just one phase of the journey. And so then I come to another place of Mara, right? Like I've been to Mara many, many, many times. And all of a sudden now for me, it was Celtic Christianity. At one point it was Barbara Simon's book, leaving Christianity and finding Christ. That was the stick that left me feeling sweet, drinking sweet water. So what tastes sweet to you? What makes your water sweet? What helps you get rid of that, the bitter waters? For a while, it was, just philosophy, looking at scientific materialism versus idealism versus other different forms of philosophies. At one point in stage in my journey, it was the occult and Kabbalah, Neville Goddard, other spiritual paths like shamanic paths, and looking at and exploring that. And so all of those things represent for me bitter waters becoming sweet. And then that brings healing. And when that healing comes, then the sicknesses and the diseases of the past system can't land on you. People can't bring you back, if you will. The guilt and the shame doesn't work like it used to work. The ostracizing of the community doesn't work. You see what I'm saying? Because we have those moments where our bitter waters become sweet. And in all those, stages and phases for me, there's also like this latest Mara for me has been really has involved some level of forgiveness, some level of saying, okay, we're all doing the best we can with what we have. And, my life was certainly marked in some negative ways, in the same way that I marked other people's lives in negative ways. We all have. Let's don't pretend that we haven't. Let's don't, virtue signal like we've never hurt anybody, right? That we aren't also in need of forgiveness from other people. And to just say, you know what, I'm not going to keep stirring the bitter waters by keep replaying my past. In order for us to be withdrawn from the waters, we have to leave our past. Moses had to leave his generational past and be raised in the palace. Then he had to leave the palace and be led by Jethro, find his Jethro, and spend his time in the wilderness. Each time he's closing the door on his past for something new and unknown. When he leaves Egypt, he closes the door on the past and goes into Midian for the new and the unknown. When he leaves the wilderness or the desert and goes back to Egypt, he's closing the door on the past and leaving the past for the unknown. When the children of Israel leave Egypt, they are leaving their past for the unknown. And again, the story of the people wandering in the wilderness was that they could not leave their past. They could not get release from their bitterness. They were unable to take advantage of all the opportunities that they were afforded to change how they were thinking and feeling. And so forgiveness is never saying what someone did to hurt me is okay. Forgiveness is never the same as reconciliation. It doesn't mean I have to go back into the snake pit to get bit again. Forgiveness is an inward thing where we relegate to irrelevance the effects of the actions of other people that have negatively impacted our lives. I'm going to say that again. Forgiveness is where we relegate to irrelevance the negative actions of others and the consequences that it did to our lives. In other words, we quit meditating on it. We quit thinking about it. Now, this is a process, and I don't want anybody to feel any level of condemnation. Part of our process is drinking from Mara. Before the waters became sweet, they had to drink them and find out that they were bitter. And that's a process. And so it's okay to be angry. It's okay to be hurt. It's okay to sit in your trauma. It's okay to recognize that you have been victimized. But if you stay there forever, then you've never left your past. And so the trick is to be able to close the door on the past and then find a new sense of purpose, find a new why. And then be willing to embrace a future that none of us know what it's going to look like. We're living in a time that will be written about in history books as much as any other time in recent history. If you were to go into the History Channel or Netflix or anything that has documentaries, historical documentaries, there's probably been hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of documentaries that have been made strictly on World War II. How many books have been written on the Depression or World War II, right? So yeah, in my lifetime, I came around just after the civil rights movement. We think about significant markers in history, all the assassinations that happened, JFK, RFK, MLK, civil rights movement, Vietnam War. I was born at the tail end of that. And then the Cold War. And then the War on Terror, 9/11. All of that stuff pales in comparison to a worldwide pandemic, to a destabilization of politics in America that is unprecedented. A former president facing indictments is unprecedented. And then you throw AI in there, you throw all the technological changes and stuff, and AI coming on the scene. I mean, this is an epic moment of change in our lives, in humanity, the future of humanity. So, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, they're going to be looking at this time. There will be classes taught in school just about this time in which we're living. And so none of us really knows what the future is going to be. And again, that is scary. And so on a macro level, it's historical. On the micro level or the individual level, we have to be willing to embrace and work through our fears of the unknown. We have to be willing to embrace that we don't know what it's going to be. We need to perhaps quit speaking with so much certainty. And it would probably be beneficial for us to avail ourselves to voices that speak to us that are outside our paradigms, that maybe tell us things that we don't want to hear about ourselves even, so that we can process our bitter waters, so that we can process the confusion of the journey and that kind of thing, and move into something new. Not waking up every morning, like Joe Dispenza teaches, not waking up every morning and repeating and rehashing and rehearsing everything from the past, but being willing to, through the power of the imagination, through the power of creativity, venture into future possibilities for ourselves and spend enough time with those future possibilities that what is pulling us, what is exercising the most influence upon our present moments is not our past, and it's not our mistakes, and it's not our bitterness, and it's not our pain, and it's not the mistakes of other people, but it is a future. It is a newness. It is a land flowing with milk and honey. We got to be positive. This is where we have to be positive thinkers. I don't think it benefits us to be dystopic. I don't think we should be out of touch with reality either, but we have to believe in our own benefit, that there's something good out there. That's why in the book of Hebrews, incidentally, there's a verse that talks about hope being the anchor of our soul, which goes before us. And so daring to think about a hopeful future, daring to think about a better future, daring to think about, like, I didn't leave the bondage of one system to die in the wilderness. I didn't leave the bondage of one system to wander around aimlessly and without purpose. I didn't leave that system which made me bitter only to keep carrying that bitterness with me every single day. But allowing for that healing process. And again, I want to emphasize it's a process. And that process just starts every day with the moments in front of you. Okay, what do I do in this moment? And this is where there is an element of surrender, where the Lord said to Moses at Mara, if you obey my voice, if you follow my voice, whatever that voice is that's pulling you into the future, surrendering, accepting that things are the way they are, accepting that things happened the way they happened, but realizing I'm not who I was, I'm not yet who I will be, but I'm not going to allow the whips of my captors from my past to keep beating me while I obsess over the stuff that I lost or the bad things that happened to me. But I allow a hopeful voice of the future to gently guide me in this moment. Instead of, I can't believe I'm here, start to think, how is what I do in this moment setting up my future? How is my procrastinating and dealing with this setting up a problem for my future self? Or how is flowing and surrendering in this moment setting up my future self for peace and happiness and joy and purpose? And spending time, instead of not asking the hard questions, who am I? Who am I at 80 years old? Who am I at 52? Who am I at 45? Who am I at 32? Who am I at 23? Wherever you find yourself on the path and journey of life. But asking yourself that question, who am I? And then asking yourself the question, why am I here? And it's okay for the why to change. Like, my why is totally different than what my why used to be. And so I don't procrastinate or run from those hard questions, those existential questions. And then ultimately, where am I going? And you may not have a clue. You may not have a clue about any of those things. But the root word for question is quest. And if you don't start asking those questions, you're going to not be on the quest. You'll be on a journey, but you'll not be on a quest. A journey can be just trying to get away from your past. A quest involves getting away from your past, but also pulls you into the future. Let me see if there's any comments here. Sylvia says, it seems to me everyone can find evidence for what they choose to believe, but can we ever know what is true and what is not? That's the rub, right? The only thing I am sure of is that you can't go wrong when you choose to love. Yeah, that's great. Love that. And it's hard to love when you're bitter, right? Let's see. Just some good mornings on here. All right. Thanks, everybody, for watching. I hope this was helpful for you. Please comment on the video. A little bit different for me, a little bit more of a preachy style kind of thing. But I do believe there's healing for you. So I do believe that you can get some empowerment from this video that can help you navigate your way on the journey. Thank you for sharing space for me as I'm on this journey as well. And if you appreciate what I'm doing, if you're on YouTube, watching on YouTube, we do have a private group on Facebook called New Day Global Facebook group. You can find the link in my bio if you're on YouTube. And if you appreciate my work, please consider donating to us at paypal.me, New Day Global, /New Day Global. Again, that link is in the description. thanks for spending your time with me. I hope this was helpful for you. And please let me know your thoughts in the comments.